Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, Michael. Woo, woo. Zoomers, we're here. He fixed it. He fixed it. So, welcome to the afternoon session. Um, say what? Okay, hold on. Come on. Turn on. Here we coming. Here we coming. Thank you. Thank you. Got to make sure all the steps are done. Okay, so Phyllis is going to introduce our guest speaker for today. And please keep your cell phone silent and Zoomers stay muted. Just to repeat, please silence your cell phones. Okay. All about ants, their lives and behavior in our human environments. Rachel Atchison is an entomologist specializing in ant research, particularly research to manage ants that are not held in good regard by humans. Across her career, she has chosen work that allows her to monitor natural resources and engage in research that explores management practices to promote biodiversity. In her current role at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agricultural Research Service, she investigates how to better manage populations of two of Florida's major invasive ant species, the imported red fire ant and the tawny crazy ant. For her master's degree research at the UF Entomology Department, she studied ant community composition and seed removal in longleaf pine forests maintained with frequent prescribed fire. And at lunch, I said, the ants remove the seeds? No, I'm misinterpreting, but we'll learn about that too. Rachel is active in science outreach and has delivered presentations and hosted interactive services and activities in informal and formal settings for school-aged children, the general public, and community groups. In her current role at the USDA, she organizes the agency's exhibition at the annual Florida State Fair. So at long last, I'm pleased to introduce Rachel. Thank you.
Everyone. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me well? Okay. What number? Okay.
Take it out of the holder.
Okay, I can take it out of the holder. That would be. Okay. Is that better? Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you for your interest in having me come and talk to your group about insects in your insect seminar. As Phyllis mentioned, I have my master's degree in entomology from the University of Florida, where I studied ant ecology. And now at the USDA, I study pesty ants and how to better manage them. So, with that experience, I am here to talk to you all about ants, their lives and behavior in their communities and our human environments. Yeah. Okay. I would like to give a talk outline first. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, we all know what we need to know about ants to understand my talk. I'm going to be going over the ant life cycle first, how they communicate and their different diets. Then I will talk about ant diversity and ecology. And then I'll talk about ants that we consider to be pests and how we do research on how to better manage those at the USDA Agricultural Research Service here in Gainesville. Oh, next. Can I? No, I don't think so. Okay, so many people are familiar with the life cycle of butterflies. We know that they undergo complete metamorphosis, where adults lay eggs that develop into larvae who just eat and eat until they get to the developmental stage of going into a pupa where they metamorphosize and emerge as an adult. And ants undergo the same life cycle of complete metamorphosis where they have all of these same life stages. Next. Okay. So with ants, one queen in a colony will lay eggs. Those eggs will develop into larvae. Oh, I forgot I had a pointer. Let's see. I have a pointer. Yeah, I have a pointer. Um, so an adult queen reproductive ant who has recently mated will find a place that is a suitable habitat to lay eggs. She'll dig a little hole, if it's an ant that lives in soil, and lay her first clutch of eggs. With her first clutch of eggs, she will be feeding them based on her fat reserves, and those ants will develop into larvae. Those eggs will develop into larvae and then pupa, which then emerge as an adult. So, like the butterfly, they go from egg, larva to pupa. When they emerge from the pupa as an adult, they might be a worker ant, which are the ants that we most regularly see walking around. And these are all females. Or they could be a reproductive ant, in which case they'll be a male reproductive ant or a female reproductive ant. Okay, so with this life cycle, we have many workers that live in the nest and cooperate in providing for this colony, right? That's why ants are called, basically they live in as this big superorganism. They are eusocial, and being eusocial means they have four different traits. So one is that they live together. Let me see here. Hold on. So they, depending on the species, nests can be made of tens of thousands of workers. And there's overlapping generations with workers caring for the young of the following generations. There's cooperative brood care, with the workers caring for the brood. And not all ants can reproduce. So that's another trait that's indicative of eusocial organisms, where you just have the ants that develop into males and females that can reproduce, but these worker females will not reproduce. Okay, thank you. um, so depending on the ant species, they will produce their sexual brood. We call it, so brood being um, the ants, the ant eggs, larva, and pupa, we call that brood. So depending on the ant species and the resources that are available throughout the year and the temperatures throughout the year, they might produce sexuals only once a year or many times a year. And locally here, we have one ant species that will be doing their mating flight soon. So when the sexuals are mature, they normally time when they go fly and find a mate after a recent rain. So it's humid, it's not too windy, and they'll go and mate generally high in the air where we will not see them, but we can see them leaving the nests as they emerge from the ground or where they are nesting. So this is the winter ant, Prenolepis in Paris, and this is an ant that will be having mating flights soon. It's one of the ants that is more active in Florida in the winter and the cooler temperatures. And you can see here, this is the queen ant. So the queen ant is significantly larger than the male. The males do not do anything in the nest. So the males are produced, they are fed, they are cared for, they hang out until it's time to mate. They'll mate and then they'll die. And the females will go and find a new place to lay eggs and start a new colony. And you can see there was a big size discrepancy between the queens and the workers within a colony. So generally, sometimes males are bigger, sometimes males are about the same size as workers. They just have wings, but the queens are always a lot larger. And they have, the way you can distinguish them, that an ant's a queen without knowing what species it is necessarily, is after they have mated and they go and land on the ground, they will tear their wings off. And so you can still see they have these really big thoraxes, because this has to encompass their wing muscles. And so they'll still have scars here from their wings. And so that's one way that you can tell that an ant is a queen and that she's mated, is that she no longer has wings. So This is a video that unfortunately I can't show you due to our tech issues, but this shows what a mating flight looks like. Here locally with red imported fire ants being very abundant, was very easy for me to capture some footage of them having a mating flight. We actually at the USDA go and collect queens that have just mated and bring them back to our lab where we can rear them up into large colonies that we could use in experiments. And I brought a small colony that just started. We just collected her about a month ago to show you. So after the presentation, you can come up here to the table and you can see her. But what they do is they do a lot of exit holes here. The workers excavate a lot of exit holes. The ants will go up to the highest place that they can from the nest and then take off. Okay, so since ants are eusocial and they all live together with this cooperative brood care, there's tens of thousands of workers in a colony. They have to be able to communicate well. And one of the main ways that they communicate is they have highly developed chemical communication. And a lot of this communication is orchestrated, I guess you could say, through their antenna. And so they use their antenna to sense odors. Their antenna have porous sensory hairs that contain odorant receptors. So they have proteins that recognize specific chemicals that can pass the signal up to their brain so they can detect differences between odors. Yep, so just a circle of the antenna. Next. So a lot of times, if you are watching some ants from the same colony or different colonies interacting with each other, you'll see them approach each other. And when they approach each other, they will touch antenna. And this is how they are determining if this is a friend or a foe, whether it's a nestmate, whether it's an adult ant, a nestmate who's a worker, whether it's a larva, whether it's a pupa, because their antenna have their sensing organs. And okay, so I have more on this slide. So what are they sensing on each other? What are they picking up on? Most insects have cuticular hydrocarbons on their body. So forms a waxy substance on their body that protects against desiccation. And in ants, there's over 180 different potential hydrocarbon signatures that they can have on their cuticles. And not only, and so workers within a colony will smell like each other, but also the queen will smell a little different from workers. Also, different parts of a worker's body will smell different. So they have really intense diversity when it comes to their body odor that they can pick up on and they can distinguish if a worker is a friend or a foe. Okay. This is a video. What I can do, if people are interested, I don't know if this is possible, but I can talk to Pam after this. I can share these videos with her later, since I'm unable to play them right now. This is just a video of some Solenopsis invicta, some red imported fire ants, and I wanted to show you how much of their movement is just moving their antenna, because that's how they're sensing everything around them. Okay, so through their antenna, they're picking up on odors. Also, they are releasing odors from their bodies, from these glands, both behind their mouths and near their ends, so near their gaster. So ants, the major body parts are here: head, thorax, abdomen. The abdomen, like us, is where their stomach is. So if an ant has had a recent liquid meal, their abdomen will swell up and get bigger. This is also where they have their whole digestive system and the reproductive system is in here, as well as other glands, poison glands if they're an ant that has venom. And from a gland located in their abdomen, they also release chemicals. So they're releasing pheromones from, releasing pheromones Oh, I can do it. Okay. I didn't understand. Okay. So yeah, they're releasing pheromones from their gaster as well as behind their mouths. And by releasing pheromones, that's another way that they're chemically communicating with each other. So one of the very well-known pheromones that I'm sure people have heard about are trail pheromones. And so this is an example where they are releasing the pheromones from their gaster, from the tip of their gaster. So one way that you could visualize this is have ants, as pictured here, on like a sooty slide, and then watch them as they go on their way back from a food source, to and from a food source, and see that they could see that the ants were dragging their gasters along. And the more ants went, the more this trail was reinforced, because other ants would come and reinforce that foraging trail. And so that's something that then they are sensing with their antenna, and that they're following to recruit other workers to a food source. Okay. Another pheromone that is one of their most important, I would say, pheromones are their alarm pheromones. And so this is something that they will emit when they sense danger. And dependent on the ant species, when they sense danger, they might act very aggressively, like red imported fire ants, or they might sort of cower in fear and try to withdraw from the threat. With fire ants and other ants, they will also release these alarm pheromones from their gaster. And so one thing that they'll do is there are ants that have acetopores. So some ants don't have stingers. They have these pores that just emit acid, that emit formic acid. And if you see ants that do this, or you're around ants that do this, you will smell it. It is a very strong smell. And so that's something that they would be reducing, emitting from their gaster. I'm going to come back to chemical communication at the end of my talk to talk about ways that we at the USDA manipulate that in order to better control certain pesky ant species. Okay, and then as far as diet, all ants they have two main food groups, right? They need protein. They can get this from live or dead insects, so they might be predators or they could be scavengers. They can also get it from seeds. They might be seed predators, and fungi as well. Ants will also farm fungus and eat fungus. And they also need carbohydrates. So adult ants can only consume liquid. And worker ants need a lot of energy for all the work they're doing. And so they get this in the form of sugar. And they can get sugar by going out and specifically finding sugary sources, or by tending sap-sucking insects. What do I mean by tending sap-sucking insects? Well, they go visit plants. Well, this is where they're going to get all their nectar from, generally, right? All their sweet, sugary liquid is going to be from plants. They can get this from nectar from flowers. They can also get the nectar from extrafloral nectaries. So certain plants, here a really common one is passion flower vine, have these nectar sources outside of the flower. And it's thought that the plants are producing these as a way to recruit ants that can then defend the plants against predators. And they also tend sap-sucking insects. So sap-sucking insects being aphids, mealybugs, or scale insects, insects that feed on plants, will then concentrate that sugary liquid and excrete it for ants, again, in exchange for protection against other predators. So one way that the ants will communicate, again, with their antenna, but more so physically, is they will actually physically drum their antenna on these sap-sucking insects, like these aphids right here. And then the aphids will give them a little drop of honeydew. Before I go on, I want to talk about how worker ants can only consume liquids. So how are they getting their proteins? This is where this cooperative brood care and working as one big organism comes into play with ants. Ants need to give solid food to the larva, specifically the fourth instar larva. So when an egg first hatches, it'll be a little itty bitty larva. Then it'll get bigger. It'll be second instar, third instar, fourth instar. Fourth instar is the largest larval stage before they go into pupa for metamorphosis. Those are the only ones that will produce the digestive juices that can break down solid food. And so once they break down solid food that's brought to them by worker ants, then the worker ants will go and share that with the queen, share that with the other larvae, and share that with other worker ants. Okay, so those were some basic facts about ants. How many ants are actually out there? There are over 16,000 named ant species currently, but there's estimated to be many more, over 20,000. Here in Florida, the numbers are always changing. We have new exotic species coming in relatively frequently, but we have about 185 native ant species and 60 non-native ant species. So with all these ants, what are they good for? I think the most important role that ants play in our lives are that they provide many ecosystem services, meaning out there just doing their business, just living their lives. They're doing things that are good for our natural environments and byproduct of that for us. So one of the things that they do is disperse plant seeds. There are tight-knit relationships between certain ants and certain plants where these plants produce this really nutritive tissue on them that the ants can detach once they bring the seed back to their nest, and then they'll deposit the seed in this nest in this nutrient-rich soil. So it's helping the plants grow, it's helping them spread. They also, through living in the soil, they aerate and turn over soil and turn over nutrients in the soil, and they also break down organic matter. So first I'm going to talk about seed dispersal. So I talked about how there are some ant species that have this tight-knit relationships with certain plants, that where the plants produce this nutritive tissue on the seed. But there are other ant species that specifically just consume the entire seed. So here locally, we have the Florida harvester ant, which is pictured here. These are specialized granivores. They consume seeds. That's what they do all day, every day. They consume seeds. And it's grass seeds, so they're relatively soft and easy to consume. And there are other ant species. Well, here you can see an example of a seed that has this nutritive tissue here. So this is an ant that's gonna just take off this little nice bit that's full of lipids, is really nutritious, and not consume the seed. But then there are other ants that will collect seeds and consume them, whether or not they are grass seeds or whether or not they have this nutritious bit to them. So for my master's research, I wanted to see what ants were picking up seeds in our longleaf pine forest ecosystems. And I identified a field site at Ordway Fisher Biological Station, which is over in Melrose, where they had this really pristine sandhill that had been burned regularly for about 20 years, burned every 1 to 2 years for about 20 years. We said, okay, well, this is a good environment that's going to have high ant diversity, has high plant diversity, and we can look at how the ants are impacted by fire and whether this fire management is impacting their seed removal activity. So for this study, I did not identify what the ants were doing with the seeds, because that would be a step forward, a step, for future research, but just looking at what ants are actually interested in seeds. So we talked about the Florida harvester ant. So I was expecting this one to be interested in seeds, and it was. This is a soil inhabiting ant. You'll see them in sandy areas. You can see these in areas that I think are actually not very pristine habitat, as long as it's pretty sandy. You can see these along the road sometimes. It's easy to spot them because they're big and they're active, and they clear this area around their nest clear of debris. So you'll have this little patch of open sand, and then they'll sort of ring it with little bits of charcoal, little bits of burnt wood, which has been something that lots of people have looked into, wondering why do they ring their nests with burnt wood, and we still don't have an answer for that. But they have two sizes of workers. They have minor workers and they have major workers. And their major workers have these very large mandibles, these very large jaws that are quite smooth for grinding seeds. And so these are the seed predators, specifically grass seeds. Even with these ants that collect grass seeds to consume them, they're not going to consume all of them. And so they're also helping these grasses spread by unconsumed seeds being left in nutrient-rich soil. Okay, now it's not working. I don't know why. Is it the battery? No, this works. Okay. Yeah, is that the next one? Is this the next one? I don't know what order I put them in. Let me see. Yeah, that one's good. This one, yeah. Okay. So I talked about grass seeds, but there are lots of other herbaceous plants in longleaf pine forest ecosystems that produce seeds that are attractive to ants. Here are just 6 of them. You might be familiar with this one. The common name is tread softly, but I know it as stinging nettle. So all of these plants here will produce seeds that are attractive to ants. So to learn which ants were collecting seeds in this habitat, I set out plant seeds from this plant called rabbit bells because it was the easiest to collect. Put it on index cards and covered it with soil so they could just sort of, walk onto it and find these seeds when they're out foraging. I wanted to put the ants that collected seeds into the context of the entire community. I wanted to know what are all the ants in this community so I know which subset of them are interested in seeds. And so to do that, I put out this mixture of tuna and honey. So I was getting the ants that were interested in the sweet stuff and the ants that were interested in the protein. And I was also collecting leaf litter and sifting through that to see what ants are not out just foraging on the ground. They might be foraging in the leaf litter. So I could try to get the widest breadth of ant species that are in this habitat. And I collected 45 total ant species. Of these 45, 20 of them came to our seeds and picked up our seeds. So that was a much larger percentage than I thought. I was thinking, of course, we're going to have the ant that is the Florida harvester ant and that collects grass seeds. And I was thinking maybe there's a few others. I was thinking, oh, we'll probably get some of these ants. The genus for this ant is Aphenogaster. Common name is they're the long-legged ants. I love these ants. They're so cute. They in northeastern deciduous forest, they have tight-knit relationships with plants that produce the seeds that have the little nutritive rich appendage on them. So I thought, oh, these are going to be really prevalent. These were actually one of the these weren't as prevalent as coming to our seeds, but they did come to our seeds. And these ants have really inconspicuous nests. So this is a nest entrance right here. You can see, you're not going to find this nest unless you're following an ant back to the nest when it's carrying food, which we did do a few times, and it's hard in the leaf litter to track these because they disappear for a little bit and they reemerge later, which is why it's hard to follow and figure out what's going on with these seeds because you have to follow them back to the nest and then you have to see what happens to the seeds. Another ant species that's pretty common out in our longleaf pine forests are big-headed ants. This is just one species of big-headed ant. There were about 6 out there. And this is actually the most diverse ant genus, the most speciose ant genus. These are particularly cute because they their name is Phytolemedalescens. They have this blue fluorescence to them. So when you're looking at them, if you shine a light on them, they just, they light up and they're glittery. They're called big-headed ants because they have two worker castes. They have minor workers and major workers, and the major workers do have very big heads. And I do have a colony of a different species of big-headed ant that I brought here today that you can look at later. These are known to be seed predators. So we have ants that we know to be seed predators, interested in seeds along Lake Pine Forest, and we have seeds that are we have ants that are known to be seed dispersers. Okay, so as far as soil aeration and turnover of soil and nutrients, all ants that are nesting in the soil are going to do this. I just want to talk about one that inhabits the soil locally around here that you might see because they have conspicuous nest entrances. This is the pyramid ant. It's called the pyramid ant because they have this little pyramid hump on their thorax. These are a native ant that is quite good at defending its territory against red imported fire ants. If you see these in your yard, yes, they're a little orange. They're orange. They're not red imported fire ants. And we like these, and we don't want to get rid of these because these don't sting us. These are just out there doing their business. And then breakdown of organic matter. So all ants are breaking down organic matter, right? So this ant here is carrying off a caterpillar carcass. So they're they're consuming all these dead insects that are around. They're consuming this food that we leave out and returning the nutrients to the soil. A specialized example of an ant that is breaking down organic matter are these fungus gardening ants. These ants are also all around here. We have some at the USDA. I've seen these in my backyard before. These are fungus gardening ants that love to collect dead plant matter, sometimes living plant matter, and one of their favorite things to collect is caterpillar droppings. So, and it's really cute. It's almost as if this dropping fits like just in this little divot of their head. I've seen them walking with it before, and you just think, oh, that must be their facial architecture must be made for that. So they collect all these things to bring them back to their nest to feed their fungus. So they garden fungus in their nest, and then they will eat the fungus. So they're bringing food to the fungus, but they're also eating it. And in doing so, they're breaking down all this organic matter. You can see their nests. Their nests also are pretty conspicuous here. They pile up the sand just on one side of the nest. So they sort of have this half crescent shape to them. You can see here, this is a fungus garden that's been uncovered. So this is the architecture of the fungus. I also brought a nest casting of one of these nests of this species that you can look at after presentation. And just for a little bit more diversity, again, all these ants are here. I wanted to show all ants that are here locally. It's just some more diversity because I've just talked about ants that live in the soil, but ants can also live in leaf litter, specifically the leaf litter. So if you don't rake those leaves and you let them sit and you let them decompose, then they can become a habitat for different ant species. So these ants are called snappy detritus ants. The genus is Stramigenes, which I love to say, and there are about 35 in Florida. They are I call them alien ants as well because they have these, triangular heads, and they have really, really diverse facial architecture, especially with the hairs. So all this stuff that looks a little shiny on their faces, these are all hairs. Some of them are more flat and glandular than others. And they have wispy hairs that go over their head. This one's called ornata. And I think it's because it has these really ornate glandular hairs coming off its mandibles. And these are specialist predators. So these ants specifically eat other arthropods that are smaller than them that also live in the leaf litter, like springtails. And then we have ants that also live in trees that are arboreal. This is just one genus of arboreal ants that I'm featuring here. These are twig ants. They are also predators. They have really big eyes. and they will nest in hollow twigs in trees. And you might have seen this one in particular. This one will frequently fall out of a tree onto you and get caught in your body, in your clothing, and sting you. So if you've seen a long, skinny red and black ant, it's likely this ant here. This is actually another non-native species from Argentina that stings. So it's one of the ones that's pesty, but we don't study it currently at the USDA. Okay, so at the USDA, with the pesty ants that we do study, we use what we know about their life cycle, the way that they communicate, and the things that they eat to figure out how we can better manage them. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of research we're doing. The major ant species that we research, that most of our money that we receive is the red imported fire ant. So the red imported fire ant has been in the US about since the 1930s and came in through the plant trade into Mississippi, and it's native to Argentina and Chile. And it is native to habitats that are along rivers, which is why when we get flooding here, you can see them floating in little mats. They're really well adapted to floods, and they can have over 100,000 workers in really big colonies, and they're aggressive. Um, since they are aggressive, you can have issues with them not only stinging people, but with stinging livestock. They also really like that honeydew, and they will go and tend sap-sucking insects. So in cropping systems, like in sugarcane, that's a problem because people that go to then harvest that crop will get stung because the ants are protecting the plants. And also in nurseries and plant nurseries, because they inhabit soil, people inadvertently move them around and transport them to new areas in potted plants, or in this picture, this is a bald and burlapped boxwood tree, which is very common ornamental that you can see in plantings, very frequently in cities and private property. So one of the things we're doing at the USDA is researching ways to better treat nursery stock, like these bald and burlapped root balls, so that we can remove any fire ants that could be nesting in here and prevent any new fire ants from coming and infesting that soil. Because within the southeast, the areas where we have fire ants, we have a quarantine zone. And if it stretches west to Texas and north to about the middle of Tennessee, people want to sell their plants outside of that quarantine zones. If you're in South Tennessee and you want to sell to North Tennessee, the plants have to be quarantined first. And right now, the way that they're quarantined is very expensive. And so we're researching ways to lower the cost of treating these root balls, so that that cost isn't transferred to nursery owners and then on to people. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is by manipulating their digging habit. So traditionally, what's done is these plants are dipped in this or drenched with this insecticide that is repellent. So the idea is that ants will not come infest the root ball because this really toxic, bad smelling thing is keeping them away. However, if the plant already has fire ants in there, when they do the insecticide, then the ants will just go farther into the root ball away from the insecticide, and you don't know that they're there until somebody goes and plants them in their yard and opens it up, and out come the ants. So what we're doing is we are trying out different insecticides that have active ingredients that are not repellent, so the ants cannot realize that they are there. So they will go, whether if there's ants already in there, they'll keep on doing their thing, digging around, walking around, or a newly mated queen who leaves the nest and flies and says, oh, this is a suitable place to land, will land, dig in there, not being the wiser, but will not survive. And so that's a way that we are using their digging habitat and their life cycle of knowing we can target ants at the colony stage, and we can also target these newly mated queens with these non-repellent insecticides that they don't know are there. Also, alarm pheromones are something we can take into account, that not only we take into account, but other insects take into account. So since the red imported fire ant is not from Florida, it's not from the US, it doesn't have any native predators here. So research from the USDA went down to Argentina looking for natural predators or natural enemies, things that will attack, or like maybe a virus will infect fire ants and that are present in their native habitat but aren't present here. And they identified several species of phorid fly here that attack fire ant workers and lay eggs inside fire ant worker heads. And so what they do is they lay eggs inside their head, right here where the head meets the thorax. They have really strong ovipositors. The female have really strong ovipositors that can get in there. And the larva will develop inside the ant head and then go into a pupa inside the ant head and then emerge as an adult. This one's ready to emerge and it's coming out the ant head. So now at this point, the ant's not going to survive. So this is something that had 5 to 7 species of phorid flies have been released. 4 have done particularly well. 2 were identified as being good candidates to release in California because we also have red imported fire ants in California that do better in California due to the weather there. And so this is one thing that the USDA did, saying, okay, they had to do lots of research to make sure these phorid flies aren't going to attack other native ants that we don't want them to attack, that they're only going to target the fire ants, and that they can establish, a high enough population that they can sustain themselves, and we don't have to keep on going out and releasing, rearing and releasing more and more phorid flies. So something that the phorid flies do is they can sense the fire ants' alarm pheromones. So when they release alarm pheromones, because they're being attacked by a phorid fly, they'll actually trigger more phorid flies to come and workers to come out aggressively, to try to, wield off this attacker, but that just in turn attracts more and more phorid flies. So one way that we've been monitoring how well these phorid flies have become established in California is by using their alarm pheromones as a way to attract more phorid flies so we can sample the phorid flies. The only way we can sample the phorid flies is by attracting them to the fire ants. So what we do is we find fire ant nests and we put these petri dishes full of non-nest mates, so other fire ants that they are going to react aggressively towards. So they're going to come out of their nest, be aggressive towards these other workers that are not their sisters, and sound the alarm pheromone, and then the alarm pheromones are going to attract the phorid flies. And we have these little sticky traps to capture the phorid flies. So that's a way we've monitored how far these phorid flies have spread from the initial sites where they have been released. The other ant that we do the most research on in the lab that I work in is the tawny crazy ant. This ant is called the crazy ant because when they are disturbed and they release their alarm pheromones, which you can smell very strongly, they also, behave sort of erratically. So that is the name for the entire genus. They're all crazy ants. This one in particular, we have some. They're not as widespread as fire ants. So they are in Florida, they are in Georgia, but they have not taken over as wide expanses as fire ants. They have more isolated populations. And generally, after a few years, we don't know why their populations crash. And we think it might be the buildup of this one fungal pathogen. But there is a site, there's a couple areas on UF campus where we have had these. And we have a site currently in Fernandina Beach. There's a really bad problem at the Jacksonville Zoo with these ants coming into their reptile enclosures and bothering their reptiles. And so one way we manipulate their diet in general, when you're studying pest ants, is you want to put out bait that they're going to be attracted to. These tawny crazy ants are especially attracted to sugary liquids. They also will tend sap-sucking insects. And so we're trying out bait with different active ingredients that we mix with sugar, water, to see, what's the most effective bait that we can use to take down these populations. And why we like baits is that we're not spraying anything. We're not spraying anything that's targeting that could impact a lot of different ant species. We're just putting out baits that they will come and consume. And so it's a more selective way to tamp down on the population. Okay, I'm about done. Okay. So my timer, my computer died over here. So one thing that we are doing is we're putting out these baits to see which active ingredient are they most interested in that they will consume and how does it impact their population. One way that we do that is we put out the baits, but then to monitor their population, we put out these tubes out in the field that they will come and nest in. So we're able to see how many ants are in this area by coming and having them, by basically creating the best nest habitat for them, because they do not build their own nest. They do not excavate the soil. They just go into places that are tight crevices. We also want to know, in regards to their life cycle, we don't know when they produce the sexual brood, the female sexual brood. They produce males all the time, but we don't know when they produce the females that can go and mate. And so we're also collecting lots of brood from the field, bringing it back, and trying to find these really, really large larvae that are queen larvae. And so this is just showing, a plot of different baits, and we don't have to get into that because I'm short on time. Okay, so when it comes to ants in your own living space and what to do with them, I would say, okay, think about their life cycle, how they communicate, and their diet, what you know about their biology to figure out, what are some ways that you can target them with their biology to get them out of your house, essentially. So if you just want to, and you need to decide, are you trying to kill the colony or do you just not want the ants in your kitchen, right? So workers so the workers are the ones that are coming out to get the food in your kitchen. If you're trying to kill the colony, you have to put out a bait that doesn't take effect too quickly. So it'll take a while so that there's time for that food to be shared with the queen. But if you're just trying to get rid of workers, you can just find out where these ants are coming from. I wouldn't recommend, but I literally duct taped my back door closed once because they were coming in through the crevices. And, they were bothering my husband. I didn't care. But they were bothering him. I'm like, okay, we don't use that door for a bit. And then they'll learn that that isn't a way to go to forage. They'll lose that habit. But you can also disrupt their foraging trail. In addition to, and you can take the food away, right? You can clean, whatever. But you can also disrupt their foraging trail. So what I just do is if I find ants in my house, I get rid of whatever they were eating. I try to find where they're coming from, try to block that off. And then with soap and water, wash down that foraging trail so they don't have that chemical trail to follow anymore. And then ants that are still in there will be confused, but they're not reinforcing that trail and recruiting more workers to come inside. But yeah, depending on the ant species, if you have fire ants, you want to use an oily bait that has a corn grit carrier. They really they go after oily baits, whereas a lot of other household visiting ants are going after that sugary liquid. Okay. Most of the videos or most of the photos I used in this presentation are from Alexander Wild. He is an entomologist who takes really, really great insect photos, but specifically ant photos. So his website is a great place to see ant photos, also Ant Wiki. And then there's this Florida Ants book that's by Mark Dayrup, which has species profiles on all the ants and drawings of all the ants in Florida, that I think is great. If you still want to stick around and talk, and I can go back to that one slide, but otherwise I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I will look more kindly on most of the ants. Thank you. And I'm going to have to discriminate between, are those fire ants or are they crazy ants or are they? Yeah, okay.
Well, you didn't really talk about pesticides too much. I didn't hear. Commercial that we can use. Is Amdril still the gold standard for getting rid of a mound of ants,
So-
of fire ants? And if so, how do you use it best?
Right. So since I work for the USDA, I cannot officially endorse any particular product, but personally, I would recommend Amdro bait granules.
Came from US.
Yeah, that is still what I would recommend as the best insecticide product out there for treating mounds in your yard.
How would you how would you spread it specifically?
So since if fire ants are in your yard, the label will tell you, generally what you should do. So the label might say, put it over the mound. So you can identify the mound and put it over the mound. What I would then do is wait a little bit, see if they move. Because frequently when they're disturbed, they're gonna move. And so then I would go and treat that new mound that you can see because there's new excavation. But in general, if you have fire ants in your yard, you don't have to put the bait directly on their mound because they are so aggressive and competitive with other ant species. They're going to find that bait. So if you just sprinkled it around and you don't want to go and find individual mounds, there could be rather small mounds that you can't see yet, especially in winter. If you just spread it sort of, I can't give you like a specific amount, but if you just sort of spread it lightly around your yard, I wouldn't worry about, oh, some other ant or some other non-target insect is going to get to that before a fire ant.
Well,
That makes sense.
my wife said I'm doing that all wrong, but I'd like the big mound to stick my finger in quickly and out, and then they all get excited, and then I put some Andril on. Is that a bad thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing. If you're just doing that, if you were to say like really, really just like disturb the nest a lot more, then they would have a greater tendency to move, and then you have to track them to the new place and treat the new place. So I wouldn't do a big disturbance to them right before you bait. I would bait, wait a bit, and then you could do a disturbance, see if it's still active, and if it's not active, try to go, say, okay, good, or search around and see if there's a new mound.
Do the non-natives displace the natives?
So there is some people have differing opinions on that. So in general, I will say some ants will displace other native ants that are competing for the same food resource. In general, a lot of what we do when we urbanize areas is reducing habitat or taking away habitat for native ant species. So there's actually like two different papers that came out about 10 years ago where one group of researchers were saying fire ants displace native ants, and another set of researchers were saying no, those native ants were already displaced by human interference, and that just allowed the fire ants to come in and make use of that empty spot essentially. So there's sort of there's conflict about that in the research community, but I think personally that it's a combination of the two.
And then my second question is maybe you said this, are fire ants seed eaters?
Yes.
I ask because we used to get the nests under the bird feeders.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I also get nests under the bird feeder. There's also a fire ant that's not the red imported fire ant. It's called the tropical fire ant that looks just like fire ants, very, very closely related to them, that specialize on seeds. So fire ants are generalists. They're going to go after seeds. They're going to go after other things. But this other species, the tropical fire ant, Solenopsis geminata, specialize on eating seeds. And I have some of those in my backyard. And, it's sometimes it can be hard to tell those apart from the fire ant. So you could have some of the tropical as well.
I have heard that the crazy ants have reduced the population of fire ants. Is that the case, or have I been reading faulty information?
You will not find, so tawny crazy ants can defend themselves very well against fire ants. And so they can, in areas where they become established, can push out fire ants. But generally, where I see the most tawny crazy ants are in areas where I wouldn't see fire ants anyway. So they don't necessarily, their habitat doesn't completely overlap. I would say it does overlap maybe a little bit in some areas, but in other ways, they're just occupying different spaces.
You have one slide that shows multiple queens. Will a hive, or whatever you call them, a colony, produce multiple queens in the same season?
So, yeah, I didn't get into that. So, some, so most ant species have colonies where they have a single queen who lays the eggs. But other species will have multiple queens that will lay the eggs. So this is true of some red imported fire ants. So we call them monogyne or polygyne fire ants. In their native habitat, there are both. And then in here, there seem to be more polygyne here. So basically, the polygyne colonies, so the colonies that have more than one queen, have this different allele for this one gene, the GP9 gene. If they have the recessive gene, then the homozygous recessive, then they will be polygyne and they will live with other queens. They'll all lay eggs and reproduce. All their workers will act as if they're totally related with each other. And they won't compete with other colonies that also are polygyne. And so it's thought that that is a trait that helps them be more invasive because they aren't competing with other fire ants that are polygyne. So then they can sort of more efficiently, you can think, take over an area because they aren't competing with the other nests.
During the mating period for a single queen, does she mate with only one male or multiple males? And if she mates with one male, are all the brood that is produced from that mating completely identical?
So yeah, so a queen will mate with only one male and store the sperm. So she has a spermatheca. She stores the sperm for the rest of her life. So every egg she lays, she has a choice, right? So interesting things about ants are if she fertilizes the egg, it will be a female. So if she adds sperm to the egg, it will be a female. But if she doesn't add sperm to the egg, it will be a male. So the females are less related to her than the males. And the females are more related to each other than they are their mom, the queen. But yeah, so she'll store that sperm her whole life. So all the workers should have all the same, they'll receive both female and male, the mother and father DNA, and not identical because depending on genetic recombination and stuff with chromosomes, right? They'll get like one copy of each chromosome from the mom and the dad. So, in the way that siblings aren't identical, these ants aren't identical, but they are, the female workers are all full siblings.
In the northern United States, there will be these swarms with the winged in the early summer. It seems like that there are multiple different species of ants doing it's all. Is it just a function of the soil temperature, or is there something else going on? And the second part of that question is, are there any opportunities during that time for control?
Mhm. So your question was, why are there multiple ant species? Yeah. So, so certainly up north, they're going to have a shorter window to do their mating flights when it's warm enough. So, yeah, the limiting factor on when they do these mating flights is going to be not only the ambient temperature, but also soil temperature. The soil temperature has to be above a certain amount for the queen to be able to survive. So I don't know if that does that answer your question. So yeah, there is a shorter window. So there is going to be overlap. It's not, oh, today all the fire ants are going to fly, and the next day all the crazy ants are going to be mating. It is more so time to the weather, having the right environmental conditions, and a colony will not only have one mating flight; they can have multiple mating flights over a warm weather season.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've run out of time, and lots of questions and good answers, and thank you very much.
Yeah, come up here. We have a species